Name is Hercule Poirot, and I'm probably the greatest detective in the world.
My initial approach to the identity of the father and therefore the person who orchestrated I's murder was through the classic commandments of a mystery story made by Ronald Knox, specifically that the culprit must be introduced prior to committing the murder. So, based on this commandment, the culprit in Oshi no Ko should reside somewhere in the first 9 chapters, right? Since whoever is introduced after is post-murder and therefore shouldn't be counted as a suspect. However, if we look at the potential suspects from those chapters, only Taishi Gotanda, the director, could somewhat fit as the culprit. He could have a strong motive to want Ai out of the picture, to get his hands on this prodigy actor. He does become a heavy shot later in the series, as we can see from his future interview page, most likely having support from Aqua as well as his friends, Kana and Akane. Also, Aqua never bothered to DNA check him as far as we know, because he fully trusts him. So he sort of seems like a great fit, right? Well, not so much when Ai herself debunks this in chapter 8 when she calls her ex-boyfriend. Other than the fact that Ai and Taishi met not long before she called her ex, therefore met the twins, worked with Aqua, even offered him future roles, he and Ai could have faked the relationship and pretended they didn't know each other on the set, but Taishi was far from being a big director, so it's not like his career would be damaged in any way if he came clean to Aqua and Ruby. He also planned to work with Ai in future films. In terms of emotional shock, Taishi would fit perfectly. Imagine Aqua hunting the guy who's been his father figure ever since he was 4. Quite a poetic twist. But this doesn't line up with what Ai says in chapter 8, and while I quite like this idea, I totally didn't spend the last few days writing a case for Taishi, totally not me, it doesn't make much sense in the big picture. One thing I learned with manga series that aren't exclusively centered on mysteries is to not overcomplicate things. We already know the culprit that fits Ronald Knox's commandment. The stalker who killed Goro showed again later and finally murdered Ai. He is the culprit that was introduced prior to the murder. He's not the guy who orchestrated the murder, but he is our culprit that fits the commandment. So, looking for suspects in the first 9 chapters isn't going to solve anything. There are, however, some very interesting things in those chapters that foreshadow a huge reveal, which I will go over a bit later. Now that we got this out of the way, let's get started, shall we? First things first, we need to establish a few things. From now on, I'm going to call the culprit the person who organized the murder. We already know a few things about that person. If we were to accept Aqua's theory that his biological father is the culprit, then we can easily remove every female character as the culprit. But should we believe his theory? The reason Aqua reached this conclusion is based on the following. Ai would only disclose information about herself, her location included, to her relatives, which she had none and she was an orphan when Ichigo Saito recruited her, to her close business associates. Ichigo and Miyako's success was based on Ai's success, the risk of leaking was way too high. To her potential friends, which she had none, she wasn't particularly close to her group members, and to a past romantic partner who could have been related to her children, her ex-boyfriend. Based on this information, the father seems to be the prime suspect. I know it appears as though Aqua reached this conclusion quite easily without much evidence, but by process of elimination, there's just one person left, and that's the father. I'm not going to dismiss the possibility of another person hearing her conversation with her ex, but that seems far-fetched and really anticlimactic to me. Another piece of evidence that supports Aka's theory that the father organized the murder happens in chapter 72, when we see a few glimpses of this person who seems to be his actual father. Based on his slender figure, blonde hair and similar facial structure as Aqua, he seems to be the real deal. He also talked about Ruby, his kid, to Ai's grave. But would a guy that brings flowers to his girlfriend's grave be a murderer? Well, when that bouquet is the same one the stalker had when he killed Ai, then I'd say there's something sinister about him. He's quietly spying on Ruby, his daughter, whom he immediately recognized without a trace of surprise in him, suggesting he either spied on her before or he was well aware of her whereabouts. He also had an affair with Himekawa's mother, leading to the conception of another son, who also had to live without his parents as they both died. Now, was he involved in their death too? That I don't know. I think it's more like the husband found out and committed murder-suicide. But based on this information and the fact that the father never bothered to meet his children, not even once, he can't possibly be a loving person. But would he go as far as to murder Ai? And for what reason? Before we can answer this question, we need to establish the father's background. Based on Masaya Kaburaki's words, he guided Ai to join the Lalalie theatrical company back when she was just getting started and was nothing like the Ai we got to see most of the story, where he assumes she fell in love. She began to pay attention to her appearance and ask him for places to dine with a guy. It's safe to say this guy is her ex-boyfriend. And because he was part of the early Lalalie lineup, where most of the people involved were actors, he was most definitely an actor himself with a great passion for his profession. Kindoichi Toshiro also says something interesting in chapter 67, that Aqua and Himekawa have similar acting styles. He goes on to say that it's the kind of acting by people who miss something, but it can also be a style inherited from their father, since they share the same father. Now, going with the educated assumption that the father was, or likely still is, an actor, what could be his motive for getting rid of Ai? And I think what happened to Akane during Love Now answered this question incredibly well. A talented actress gets into an unforeseen accident which causes a scandal, and her whole career is ruined to the point where she decides to end it all. In the case of the father, this could go two ways. Either he was older than Ai, and the news of him having kids with an underage girl could have ruined his career, or he was as young as Ai, maybe even younger, and the same news could have ruined his career. It all comes down to his career. What would a talented actor who loves his job do when his career is threatened? Actors doing everything in their powers to succeed, to keep their careers going, is one of the most prevalent aspects of the story that's been thrown in our faces as often as possible. Kana's whole storyline is a prime example. It's likely the father wanted to avoid a similar scenario to what happened to Akane, have his career ruined. But this leaves the question of why didn't he send someone after Ruby and Aqua? And the answer is fairly straightforward. Why would he? Nobody but Ai knew he's the father. Not even Ichiko Saito, who considered her family, knew his identity. Killing her would bury his secret forever. Now, there's also the chance that he manipulated the stalker to kill Ai and the kids at the apartment, but Ai's speech about love got to the stalker and he regretted his actions. This would further be supported by the fact that he committed suicide, but on the other hand, the father seems to be aware of his kids' whereabouts and lets them be, so it could be either one. I also want to take this opportunity to answer another question that might be on your mind right now. Why did the stalker kill Goro? I'm assuming this person is the same who killed Ai, because Goro pretty much states this information himself. Therefore he must have seen and remembered the stalker's face, and that's how he made the connections. Otherwise it makes no sense to say they're the same person. The creepy child-looking deity also confirmed this. So why kill Goro? I think it's either tied with the reincarnation plot and the child-looking deity from Miyazaki, who, if I were to make an educated guess, would be Yatagarasu, the three-legged crow from Japanese mythology. I will explain this in just a second, but the other possibility is that the stalker killed Goro because he chased after him. If Goro wouldn't have chased him into the woods, he would have most likely survived. Which leaves the question of why didn't the stalker go after Ai? Well, it's probably a bit hard to get inside the hospital and find someone who's giving birth while the president of Strawberry Production and the hospital staff is looking after her. Now, let's pause here for a moment to explain this deity part before things get too complicated. Chapter 79 introduced a heavy supernatural aspect to the story through this little girl surrounded by 8 crows that seems to have all the answers. She reveals some unknown information about the overarching mystery, like the stalker having a middle schooler partner back when he lurked around the hospital, and she acts as a guide for Ruby in her ignited quest for revenge. And just like that, deities are now part of the mystery. This information might either completely change everything or nothing at all, but either way we need to establish its meaning before we can go any further. And let's start with this deity kid. In Japanese mythology, Yatagarasu, which means 8-spun crow, is said to be the servant of the sun goddess Amaterasu. This servant was sent to guide Jimmu, the first emperor of Japan, through his journey to establish his country. Jimmu's clan originated in Kyushu, in present day, that's Miyazaki Prefecture, birthplace of Aqua and Ruby. After suffering many hardships, Jimmu's older brother, leader of the expedition, was killed in battle. Jimmu took charge of the expedition but got lost in the mountains of Kumano. Seeing that, the sun goddess Amaterasu sent Yatagarasu, a giant crow, to show Jimmu the way and guide him towards becoming the first emperor. Now, you might have noticed some similarities between the legend and Oshinoko. Yatagarasu seems to be depicted by this deity kid. She's seen to be accompanied by 8 crows, always surrounded by at least a few. She's guiding Ruby, who seems to be lost, towards her now path of revenge. Remember, she showed her the way to Goro's corpse and is now feeding her information about the 2 culprits. The middle schooler will be especially interesting. Ever since she met this deity, feathers of crows somehow find their way to Ruby. In chapter 3, Ruby also introduced herself to Miyako as the embodiment of Amaterasu, obviously making up this lie as a way to control Miyako. It was more or less a joke for the readers, but knowing that deities actually exist in this universe make this connection sound a lot more plausible. Ruby being connected in one way or another with the sun goddess Amaterasu and also being guided by Yatagarasu in her path of revenge. The star in her left eye, now both eyes, might also support this idea, but I'll get into that shortly. Now this connection raises a lot more questions than it answers, so let's dive a bit into the Japanese mythology of Amaterasu to find out the roles of Aqua, I and the father, and by the end of it, everything will fall into place. Don't worry, this won't be a history lesson, I'll just cover the essentials. Amaterasu is one of the 3 gods born from Izanagi's purification, following his attempt to free his wife Izanami from the land of the dead. His wife died giving birth to one of their many children, and after grieving her for a very long time, he became determined to bring her back from the land of the dead. However, she was now a rotten, decaying corpse which terrified Izanagi, and so he ran, abandoning and imprisoning Izanami in the house of the dead forever, where she would become the goddess of the dead. To purify himself from the decay, he bathed in a river from which 3 precious children were born. The sun goddess Amaterasu from his left eye, the moon god Tsukuyomi from his right eye, and the storm god Susano from his nose. Amaterasu would go on to have her own children with her husband Tsukuyomi, Sweet Home Alabama. One of those children was the great-grandson Jimmu, who would become the first emperor of Japan, and who originates from Miyazaki, the same place where the goddess hid herself in a cave after her conflict with her brother Susano. The cave became one of the most sacred places in current Japan. While Amaterasu was the kind and caring goddess, her husband, brother Tsukuyomi, was a cold and violent deity, a stickler to the rules of etiquette, even going as far as to kill another goddess who, in his eyes, breached those rules. That incident resulted in his separation from his wife and thus the origins of day and night. It's said that Tsukuyomi continues to pursue Amaterasu across the night sky without ever reaching her. That's the short version of Amaterasu's legend. Now, why is this important? The manga has established that deities exist in its universe through this little kid heavily implied to be Yatagarasu. Yatagarasu's only connection in Japanese mythology is with Amaterasu and Jimmu, the sun goddess and the first emperor of Japan. Amaterasu's name was mentioned in the series by Ruby, initially as a joke, but now it's clear there's more to it. So, it seems that Oshi is drawing parallels from the legend, even following it to some extent. If this hypothesis is true, then we should be able to draw more information from the rest of the legend that should reveal the mystery of the manga. We're going to make a nice graph to visualize the parallels, but before, let's have a quick look at the Amanoyato shrine. Located in Miyazaki, the shrine was placed at the entrance of the cave in which Amaterasu hid from her brother Susano. What's interesting about this shrine is that the Japanese believe that if you make a small tower of stones in front of it and make a wish on it, with Amaterasu's blessing, your wish will come true. According to Masaya Kaburagi, the first time he met Ai, she was just a bumpkin who came from the countryside. Ichigo Saito scouted her when she was just a middle schooler, an orphan unable to love who lacked any sort of confidence. But notice that she had the iconic stars in her eyes at that time. As soon as she made someone at the Lalalie, she became a strong and confident woman, embracing lying as a form of showing love. Was this sudden transformation from a bumpkin nobody to a mesmerizing idol just luck? Or could the blessing of a deity play a role here? Did she always have those starry eyes, or did she get them as a symbol to a divine blessing? If we were to make that nice graph visualizing the parallels between the legend and Oshinoko, it would look something like this. The descendants of Amaterasu and Tsukuyomi originate from Miyazaki. Ruby and Aqua, as well as their former selves, Serena and Goro, also originate from Miyazaki. There's a high possibility that Ai also comes from Miyazaki. Actually, I'm going to outright say that she does come from Miyazaki. The cave Amaterasu shot herself into is located in Miyazaki. Goro's body was found in a cave behind the shrine in Miyazaki, revealed to Ruby by a crow, Yatagarasu. Yatagarasu was a guide sent by Amaterasu. We know Yatagarasu is clearly guiding Ruby. After Jimu's older brother died in battle, he took over the command under the guide of Yatagarasu. This is an interesting one because while Aqua clearly isn't dead, he did lose his hope of revenge in battle, symbolized by the faded star in his eye. Now Ruby, under the guide of Yatagarasu, took over that revenge and gained Aqua's star as a way to symbolize that she is in command of the revenge. There's also the fact that Amaterasu was born from Izanagi's left eye, Tsukuyomi from his right eye, and we know that Ruby's initial star is in her left eye and Aqua in his right. Amaterasu is said to be a bright and kind-hearted goddess, very much like Ruby before she awoken her Mangekyo Sharingan, and also like Ai. And in turn, Tsukuyomi is said to be a strict and violent god obsessed with the rules of etiquette. Aqua might not be all that strict, but has the violence in his murderous intent to kill his father. Which, and I'm going to go on a massive speculation right now because there's nothing to base this on other than the legend, would mean that the star in Aqua's right eye, now Ruby's, is inherited from their father. It's fueled by negative feelings. If we were to go with the hypothesis that Ai was blessed by Amaterasu, maybe because she wished to become famous or understand love, and that blessing gave her these starry eyes and made her shine bright and draw people in, then the father could have been blessed by Tsukuyomi, receive the same starry eyes or the black version, and become a proud actor violent enough to kill Ai, who breached the rules of etiquette by having kids while being a minor. Now, I don't want to stress this too much because this part is just speculation. I do think Ai has some sort of connection with the sun goddess Amaterasu, likely received her blessing, and that's how she became famous. I also think the moon god Tsukuyomi will also play a part in the story, likely related to the father, but I don't know how that's going to unfold. The supernatural is not exactly easy to predict, but regardless, keep an eye on Amaterasu's legend while reading the manga because I am 100% sure it's going to follow it. Now that the supernatural aspect of the story is out of the way, who the fuck is the father? It's the middle schooler, the one Yatagarasu mentioned, the stalker's partner, one of the guys who lurked around the hospital when Ai was about to deliver. The common sense guess is to assume that Ai's boyfriend was older than her. That's the usual type of relationship that happens in the entertainment industry, which tends to result in a scandal. But there are actually proofs in the manga that support the idea of a younger boyfriend. The most obvious one is centered around Melt, the less talented actor. He outright says it himself in chapter 57 that when he entered middle school, which would put him at 12 years old, he was taken advantage by a third-year upperclassmate. This established that the idea of intimate relationship between middle schoolers was actually happening. This should also confirm that a relationship between Ai and a younger person would be possible. It also explains the dilemma around Himekawa, the twins' half-brother. Now we're going to get into some numbers, so let's break this down. Ai was 16 years old when she got pregnant, possibly 17 when she gave birth. Middle schoolers in Japan have between 12 and 15 depending on which year they are in. However, we know that in the present day, Himekawa is 20 years old while the twins are 17 respectively. There might be some differences in months, so let's play it safe and say that Himekawa is 3 or 4 years older than Aqua. Himekawa's parents committed suicide when he was 5. This means the twins were either 1 or 2 years old at that time, 4 years old when Ai died. If the middle schooler put a child in Himekawa's mom when he was 12, which we know is possible since Melt had an intimate encounter at the same age, and in real life boys hit puberty anywhere from 9 to 14, then he should have been 15 when he put the twins in Ai. 3 years difference, give or take a couple of months, which would make the middle schooler 1 year younger than Ai, 15 respectively 16. And so, timeline wise, it fits perfectly. Furthermore, if the middle schooler was 15 when Ai gave birth, that would make him 30 or 31 in the present day. The man we see in chapter 72 seems to lean towards that age. He doesn't seem to have wrinkles to appear older, nor does he appear younger compared to Ruby. The most significant proof though, and the missing piece, comes from the mouth of this crow deity. First, The stalker had a partner, the middle schooler Ai's boyfriend. This guy obviously knew that Ai was pregnant, and he also seems to know where she was going to give birth, therefore trying to prevent it from happening. It's extremely likely that Ai was keeping in touch with him throughout her pregnancy. The reason I'm saying this is based on how she approached him on the phone in chapter 8. She told him that the kids have grown a lot and to come and see them, as though he would already know that she went ahead with the pregnancy. The conversation implies that the boyfriend was at least aware of the kids' existence. So back during the hospital part, the boyfriend knew I was going to deliver and he knew where that would happen, likely because she told him. Because the pregnancy would have affected his career, causing a scandal, he manipulated Ryunosuke, an obsessed fan of Ai, to murder her and or the kids. I'm saying her and the kids or either because of what happens in chapter 9. Ryunosuke recognized his mistake after hearing Ai's speech about love and committed suicide because of that. Possibly. It's likely he was manipulated by the boyfriend into thinking Ai was just lying and messing with the fans. However, back at the hospital, Goro gets in the way and Ryunosuke is forced to take him out. He also probably killed him out of jealousy. Flash forward to the end of chapter 2, we can see that the stalker is well aware that Ai has a kid. He wouldn't know she had twins, after all Ichigo Saito made sure to protect and shelter her as much as possible, but the stalker knew she was pregnant back then. Now, whether Ai kept in touch with her boyfriend throughout those 4 years of peace doesn't matter, because the second she gave him her address, the same stalker who accompanied the middle schooler at the hospital came to her door and killed her. If this isn't confirmation that the middle schooler is her boyfriend, then read what the Crow Deity says here. She has no trouble telling Ruby about the stalker, but when she asks about the middle schooler, she says that it's Ruby's role to figure it out. Now, what's Ruby after? What does she and Aqua want to find? Whose identity are they chasing after? Their fathers, the middle schooler. What this all means, and it pains me to say it, is that the father isn't someone we've met or someone that appeared in the manga prior to chapter 72. I'm confident he isn't someone we know. If I'm wrong and he already appeared in the story, I have an apology video ready to go. But what I'm going to say with confidence is that the middle schooler is the father. He was around 15 when he left Ai pregnant. He is a great actor, most likely a heavy shot, and we have not met him before. Obviously we get glimpses in chapter 72, but other than that, we haven't. Now, there's still something left. I want to go over the future interviews we see in the first 9 chapters because there's something absolutely fascinating happening in between the lines that might just foreshadow the ending of the series. What caught my attention in particular is the interview with Taishi Gotanda. He created a film called 15 Years of Lies, which is a retelling of Ai's life story. As part of the main cast are Ruby and Aqua. The script for the film was written with the help of Nanada Dengoa, as he's the only scriptwriter we get to know well enough during the 2.5D play. It's also very likely, I would even say I am 100% sure of this, that Akane plays the role of Ai in the movie if it wasn't for the ridiculous number of dead flags she's been collecting like crazy, but I'd rather not get into that now. She's been shown to portray Ai to an almost frightening degree. If she happens to die, then I think Kana will take the role. Based on the fact that the film was made 15 years from Ai's death, that would put Aqua and Ruby at 19 years old, since they were 4 when she died. So, assuming that Akane plays the role of Ai, what roles do the twins play? They surely can't play the role of her kids, right? Ruby could portray a member of the old Bikomachi, since she's a current idol, it wouldn't be far-fetched. Kana could accompany her, but what about Aqua? Well, let's have a look at his interview. The most important bit here is that he says acting is his form of revenge. What's interesting about his statement is that so far in the story, acting has just been a way for Aqua to get closer to certain people, to meet people who are connected to Ai in one way or another. Acting itself was not a form of revenge, but a mean through which he could get his revenge. Something must have happened that made Aqua want to exhibit revenge through his acting. Now you'll notice that these interviews take place roughly at the same time, before Taishi's film was released. Ruby is interviewing for her first acting role and we know she's part of Taishi film. Kana is also part of the film. Miyako, Ichigo and the old teacher also get interviewed around the same time. So knowing all of that, it seems like Aqua wants to have his revenge through the role he'll play in the film. But who's he playing as? If this is a retelling of Ai's story and Aqua will get his revenge through it, who is left to play. Initially I thought that maybe it is the stalker, but what would that prove? How can he get his revenge by portraying the stalker? And then it clicked. What if I told you he's playing the role of his father, exposing his crimes and getting his revenge through the film? At the end of chapter 72, we get a few glimpses of their father. If he turns out to not be the real father, then it would be a weird type of unreliable narration, but that aside, if we look at the few panels he appears in, he sort of resembles Aqua. They have the same hair color as we know from this panel where he's next to Ruby, might even have a similar hairstyle, the face is very similar, they both have slender bodies. Therefore, it's fair to assume Aqua might resemble his father's appearance. It's not a necessity to look similarly, but it's there. I also consider the possibility that Aka Akasaka might want to show how revenge isn't the way to go. Aqua killing his father wouldn't give him the satisfaction he desperately craves, and it wouldn't allow him to grow. However, exposing the crimes of a murderer isn't revenge, it's justice. He's exposing a criminal. He's not taking matters into his own hands and kill him. He's exposing him to the world. This way Aqua doesn't get blinded by revenge and the father gets what he deserves. And that would wrap up this video. I got to say that it's been incredibly fun to get back into mysteries and theories. I had a great time trying to figure out who's the father, and I thought I would never reach a decent conclusion to the whole gods and goddesses aspect of the story. I'm really not a fan of supernatural mysteries just because of how unpredictable they are, but the identity of the father was my cup of tea. Now all I got to do is wait and see how everything I said fails.